Arizona illegal immigration fight goes international. A group of UN human rights experts is seriously concerned about Arizona's law. Now, why? Joining us live is Jim Anaya, a UN-appointed independent expert on human rights. He's also a University of Arizona law professor. Good evening, Jim.
Good evening.
All right, looking at this new statute, which part to you violates any human rights? What's the objectionable part?
The problem with the law is that it seems to represent a general pattern of animosity towards ethnic or racial minorities in Arizona.
All right, let me stop you right there. You say, let me just stop you there. You're a lawyer and says seems to represent. You and I both know that when you look at a statute to see whether it's objectionable, you look at the clear language. You don't see what you might think or what it seems to or whatever
well, let me
it
just
is.
say,
you look at it. So I'm looking at the statute saying which part is the part that you think is racial profiling or unconstitutional?
Well, I haven't said it's racial profiling or unconstitutional. I've joined a number of human rights experts speaking in our capacity as United Nations human rights experts, raising concerns about the possible application of the law and the underlying sentiments that it seems to represent. Now, what we're trying to do is point out the potential for the law to be discriminatory, to involve racial profiling.
All right, let me stop there. Possible application. Every time a police officer makes an arrest, there is a possibility the police officer is going to go beyond the Fourth Amendment and violate constitutional rights. Every single arrest has that possibility. So this statute has that possibility, and so does every other. So possible application can't possibly offend you. What?
Well, what we're doing is we're trying to avoid that. We're trying to minimize that by pointing out the difficulties that others, many have raised with the law. There is a wide gap in perceptions about the law among different legal experts have looked to it. We're observing from the standpoint of international human rights experts, speaking in our capacity as human rights experts, trying to avoid situations in the future that could infringe international human rights standards. The underlying concern here is the United States an obligation that runs to the states, the obligation to not simply avoid specific acts that discriminate or violate norms of anti-discrimination, but its obligation to promote understanding among different ethnic groups. Its violation to promote practices.
I'm actually with you. I'm totally with you. I'm opposed to human rights violations. I'm just wondering whether you can put Arizona in the same category with China, the Sudan, Saudi Arabia.
Well, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. We're not doing that.
But what you are saying, let me tell you what you are doing. What you are saying is that the possible application of this, and I guess that's what I'm struggling with. Frankly, I don't even think Arizona needs this law. But in our last guest, you might have heard me say that. I'm not. There's nothing new in this law.
And that's the point. So what's it doing? What's it doing then? If there's nothing new in that law and it doesn't need it, if that's the case, then it's this underlying sentiment that I've raised, that the UN human rights observers that I'm part of is concerned about.
I don't think it's a human rights violation, but I do think what it is.
Well, we haven't said it's a human rights violation specifically.
Well, you're looking at it.
We said that it raises concerns about that. No, we're raising concerns in our capacity as human rights experts to avoid human rights violations.
This is no different than any other statute. If you're going to say that, I think
No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. It's not the same as human rights statute. It raises concerns about specific acts that could occur of racial profiling and discrimination against persons. Now, there is a
Have you read that? I mean, look at this.
There's a huge divide. Yes, I've read the law. Yes, I have read it.
It says, stop for a second, Jim. It says for any lawful contact. That's what the starting point is. So for any lawful contact.
And what exactly does that mean? What exactly does that mean, any lawful contact? That's subject to interpretation.
That's any authority. We give that authority to cops every single day. We tell them to stop people.
But now, with that any lawful contact.
Based on good reason. We expect them to do it for good heart and good reason.
Well, but now with any lawful contact, they're required to, on the basis of reasonable suspicion, question people on the basis of their immigration status. And in Arizona, it's hard to imagine a reasonable suspicion about immigration status existing without race being a significant factor. And that's the concern, given the demographics of Arizona. And that's why you have a huge polarization in Arizona between minorities who may be the subjects of this law and the majority. That is in favor of the law, and that itself raises a red flag and concern.
I think this is a fight that we all don't really need to be having. Just so you know, I'm opposed to human rights violations. I'm opposed to
I agree, and that's our point. That is our point. Greta, that is exactly our point.
I'm not sure this law does anything other than send a red flag up to the federal government. Quit lying to us that you're going to do something
And it
about
sends a red
immigration.
flag that there's something underlying this law. That sends a red flag that there's something underlying this law. And that's what we're trying to point out and trying to avoid an escalation of this kind of attitude that could result in patterns of discrimination. Now, the role of the United Nations mechanisms is not simply to point out violations, but it's to try to act in cooperation with the government's concern to avoid those violations in the future. And I hope you can understand that. We're not simply, please.
Jim, I just hope that you have that same view if this teacher is correct about what's being taught in ethnic studies in terms of raising all sorts of hatred and creating problems between the several segments of our population down there. Human rights has got to go both ways.
No, if in fact that's what we're doing, then of course we would raise the same concerns about that. But what we see is that this anti-ethnic studies law doing the opposite of what you're saying. It's based on an animosity we fear, and what there are several indications show, an animosity towards minorities in this state, not the opposite. And one needs to look at the context. One needs to look at the context of specific studies. There should be no animosity,
but either way. But it's got to be a level
we're in agreement there.
It's got to be a level playing field.
We're in agreement there.
Anyway,
we're in agreement
Jim,
there. But the problem is that there isn't a level playing field.
I'm sorry, Jim, we don't have more time because we got a lot more to discuss anyway. But I hope you come back.